Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for a very special session. We have with us Excellency Jorge Quiroga, who was the former president of Bolivia. And of course, he has been a long-standing policymaker in Bolivia with one of the, I think, the youngest vice president in the country, and thereafter and engaged with a number of portfolios, including the Ministry of Finance and with the Ministry of Planning. He has also held senior positions in various intergovernmental organizations in the world. So it's a pleasure for us and an honor to be able to host him for this public conversation as part of his engagement with ORF. He's here in Delhi for our Future of Diplomacy forum that ORF is inaugurating this evening. Therefore, it gives us a great opportunity to be able to engage him in conversations about Bolivia, about Latin America, about changing world politics, and how perhaps Bolivia looks at the world and looks at Latin America and its role in the world. As also from our vantage point, the baton of G20 is moving from South Asia to Latin America. So it will be also interesting to hear his views on that. But before we open this up for a formal conversation, I'll give the floor to Excellency Quiroga for his initial remarks, in which he's free to elaborate on whatever he feels like. But we would really love to hear his impressions of the changing world order, how the world is evolving, and also how Bolivia sees the world and how it wants to engage with the world on its own terms. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Professor. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jorge Quiroga. The ambassador here was telling me my nickname is Tuto, T-U-T-O, which is my father passed it on to me. If people that don't like it, I say it's his responsibility. And I legally made it part of my name, so like my passport has that name for electoral reasons and for campaign ballot names. Thanks very much, Professor, for the opportunity to be at wonderful ORF. It's quite an organization. I'm a little bit familiar with what it does. I first got engaged with it in a forum in Berlin and the run-up to the G20 and the very incredibly successful chairmanship of India, of the G20, and its leadership on that event. And then the Kigali dialogues in Rwanda. But here we are. I've seen ORF's work outside of India. Now I am where everything happens. So congratulations to all the ORF leadership and staff. How many of you know where Bolivia, how many of you have been to South America? Just so I see. Never. Except the ambassador. No, ambassador, he's a cousin of Lionel Messi. He's been in Argentina a long time. Okay, my country's smack in the middle of South America, surrounded by large neighbors, nothing like India, but Brazil is large for us. And it's taken over the baton of the G20, so I'll give you a perspective on that. And I know at ORF you have hosted people that have come from far away and long distances. I guarantee you, no one has been here that has come from higher than I have, not job-wise, but airport-wise. The airport where I live is 4,000 meters. It's the highest airport on a seat of government anywhere in the world. We have beautiful Andean mountains all around. So it's the home field advantage when we play soccer. If you ever want to win a bet, you can ask the following. Name a country where Messi has been 4 times to play international matches and never scored a goal. La Paz, Bolivia. So you win an easy bet there. Tell all your wonderful batsmen that you have playing cricket in the World Cup for India, if they ever want to hit their longest shots ever, they can come to La Paz, Bolivia. You hit long golf drives and long cricket shots as well. But I wish India success in the Cricket World Cup. So if you do successful G20 hosting and then win the Cricket World Cup, I think India will be the much better for it. Quickly, 4 points before we engage and open up for conversation. My perspective is personal, from a person that has been engaged in policy making and the issues of my region in Latin America. And I want to couch him in terms of the importance of India vis-a-vis these issues when we move forward. I think we had been aware, of course, for a long time of the importance of India engaging in the global discussion. Now nobody questions it. Now everyone from the US to European to Chinese leaders are fighting and queuing up to engage with India. So you have a great opportunity to be a decisive policy maker in issues that affect us all. And I will just take 4 to open up the conversation. Trade, development, tech, and energy. First on trade. From a Latin American perspective, I have to tell you bluntly and honestly that it's very frustrating to see the 2 large regions, country or regions, that were very important to us are basically closed for trade business. I'm talking about the US and Europe because of what I'll describe briefly, but you probably are aware of what's been happening. The US, for a long time, if you came from Latin America, you learned that we had issues, drug, crimes, everything that we have, but 2 that were very important. We wanted access to the US market. In Latin America, it's a region. And we wanted decent treatment for our migrants that would walk across the border or get into the US. And for a long time, there was a vital center in the US where in those 2 issues, trade and migration, you could get an opening. In trade, you had a large number of Republicans with a few Democrats that were open to trade with Mexico, with Central America, with Peru, with Chile, with all of South America and the Caribbean as well. And on migration, you had a large number of Democrats and a few Republicans that were open to giving our people good treatment when they got to the US and sent remittances. But lo and behold, lately, there is general consensus that it's not just Trump, that the US does not want our people or our products. And if you don't believe me, you just go to the paper right now. And when Trump was saying, build a wall, Democrats were saying, we're going to tear down the wall. They were sounding like they were in Berlin. And now, if you read the paper, they're going to build a wall and they're going to deport people from Venezuela that are fleeing and escaping a ruthless authoritarian government. We're a long ways away from the U.S. welcoming Cuban refugees that were escaping the Cuban totalitarian regime. Now Venezuelans that are escaping that dire situation are going to be deported back and the wall will be built. And the chances of getting a trade agreement with anyone through the U.S. Congress is 0 right now. So then the U.S. comes to Latin America and they preach to us and they say, Huawei, no way, get out of the way, whatever. But they are not open for business. And unfortunately, the same thing is replicated on the European Union. Mercosur, as the ambassador knows, is the bloc of the southern South America, has been talking, negotiating, and signing the agreement to open up trade with the European Union for years and years and years. This is like the forever-lasting, never-ending dating process. You talk, you sign, and you never get married. And the excuses kept changing. The Amazon thing, Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, we didn't like him. The excuses keep changing. But now there's like no justifiable excuse, and it does not go through. This has gotten to the point where countries in South America that the ambassador, he was telling me he's been to, Uruguay, Paraguay, that will never be accused of having leaders that are pro-China or communist or anything like that, are asking China for a trade agreement because the EU, European Union, and the US are not open for trade agreements. Paraguay, so you would know, is a small little bitty country. The last nation in South America that recognizes Taiwan and not China has publicly stated that if by December we do not have a trade agreement with the European Union, we're going to go negotiate with Asia, which is understood in our region as code for China. And that's where I think India has a great opening in our region in South America and Latin America, because we keep thinking of the 3 big poles: the US, closed for trade; EU, closed for trade; China, very aggressively seeking trade openings. And the question that begs itself is, how do we engage with the giant India moving ahead? So that's, I think, with the baton being passed over to Brazil, there will be an active Indian presence in Brazil, which is our largest country, as you know. It's 200 million is small for India, but for us in Bolivia, that's very large. We share half our border. We sell them lots of gas. So that provides a unique opening for India to look at Latin America as a trade opportunity and as a partnership opportunity as well. I can tell you the Chinese have been very shrewd about this. At the beginning of the century, we had Chinese diplomats parading through South America, getting the seal of approval that China was WTO ready and was a developing country. And a few years later, all the Chinese products were coming in, and China was buying all the energy, food, and minerals from South America. It is, so you know, the number one or number two buyer and trade partner for each country in South America is China, because we have lots of coal, lots of oil, lots of gas and energy. We have lots of soybeans, wheat, sugar, coffee in South America. We have lots of tin, zinc, lead, copper, and that's what China has been buying at ever increasing volumes, at ever higher prices. So that creates a natural partnership. So they do have a large advantage in South America on that regard. So my message here on trade would be, everybody knows now the importance of India. They have the G20 opening, passing the baton to Brazil. I would seize the moment to actively engage with Latin America with a large India giant, and I'll make a comment at the end of why. Second, on development. In Latin America, we have had to deal, of course, with development institutions that are very much Washington-based and EU and US dominated. Call it the World Bank, the IMF, you know the drill. They have voting capacity in those institutions. I'm talking about the US and Europe, that is well above their global share of GDP or population. And they even have an arrangement that you know that the World Bank is always run by an American and the IMF always run by a European, as if they had a monopoly on people that are competent in development or monetary macroeconomics. And as a matter of fact, I can tell you we've seen a few that were far from competent just based on that regional national quota assignment. Now, of course, the World Bank has an American president from India. That's okay, one step ahead. But we should move, one day we should be an Indian nominated by India, not an Indian nominated by the Americans. Because I can tell you from factually speaking, having dealt with debt relief, development loans, capitalization of the institutions, I know plenty of people in Latin America that are very competent to be able to run for one of those jobs. The gentleman that was running the OECD for a long time from Mexico, he and I were doing debt relief. His debt had 2 more zeros than mine, but we renegotiated all the debt. So we have people that are very familiar and very capable and competent on these issues. And unfortunately, development architecture is geared towards the domination of this country. So now we have the other group that is China-led. China has been very aggressive, not only in buying our commodities, but also as a lending institution, as a lending country, and then later as an investor. It'll be, why is there an opportunity in this regard for India as well? Because in this discussion, you have the World Bank, IMF, Western, quote unquote, led institutional framework. And now you're developing the China-led BRICS Bank in Shanghai lending capacity beyond China's bilateral capabilities. So this, again, begs the question, where is India? Vis-a-vis, well, how are we going to reform the World Bank, the IMF, and how are we going to engage with the world? And today that is more important than ever from the standpoint of Latin America. I will tell you this because in the US, you know, the Congress is dysfunctional. They just sent home the Speaker of the House and everything that happened. But there's one institution that works very effectively based purely on domestic considerations with gigantic global ramifications. I'm talking about the United States Federal Reserve Board, which is, when you're sitting at Latin America, Professor, it's either a blower or a vacuum cleaner that is very, very effective. When the US has the Lehman crisis or when they have COVID, they start printing dollars. The beauty of being on the Federal Reserve Board is that you can print dollars with impunity And the dollar does not devalue against itself because it is the reserve currency of the world. If we did that in Brazil, Mexico, Bolivia, we'd be called irresponsible. You're unleashing inflation. You have Argentina economic policy. But the US did it. At the heyday of quantitative easing, which is printing money, sounds like a stomach ailment, right? Quantitative easing. It is printing money and buying bonds. They were printing one Brazil per year in terms of Brazil GDP. That's a lot of money that was being thrown. So it's a blower. Dollars were blowing out the window, and dollars come in to Latin America, currencies appreciate, we're semi-happy, and everything is hunky-dory then. And things change, inflation perks up domestically inside the US, and they start hiking up interest rates with dramatic speed, which has global ramifications, but they do it purely and solely based on domestic reasons. And now interest rates keep going up. So the blower that was sending dollars our way becomes a vacuum cleaner and it starts taking out the liquidity. And we have crunches in lots of countries. And where do we get foreign currency? Oh, the World Bank, the IMF, the Inter-American Development Bank. And those are very much run and dependent on the leadership of the United States and the European Union that for domestic reasons, including what's happening in Ukraine, say, oh, no, we don't have enough money to capitalize the Inter-American Development Bank. We don't have the funds to capitalize the African Development Bank. So here we are suffering the foreign currency crisis, and the development architecture is not responsive. And by the way, China, that was a very aggressive lender, now is run into a bit of trouble. And they, for the first time, are switching sides on the table. Right? Imagine this table here. I've been to it several times. It's called the Paris Club. That's where you go renegotiate your bilateral debts. And we always had, Bolivia, Guatemala, Kenya, Uganda on this side, and Europe, and US, and Japan on the other side. And for a long time, China was on our side of the table. And now it is switched over to the creditor side of the table. And now they're having to take haircuts on their debt, which they do not want and like. So it is, and ask Sri Lanka, ask Zambia, ask a lot of countries, that issue will come to a head. So in a nutshell, the development Western architecture is not responsive. It is based on old arrangements, and it's not responsive in terms of the foreign currency needs of the developing world. China was an aggressive lender, not so much nowadays, and still has not figured out how they will treat their debt when it comes to renegotiations. So again, another opening, it begs the question. So if this is the US and Europe, and this is China, where's India? What's India going to do, and how will it engage with the world? The two last comments before we open it up on tech. The digital world is changing everything, and it seems, at least from where we sit, it's the fight between two giants. Here's the Western system of their Amazon, the Twitters, the Facebooks, the WhatsApps, the Instagrams, and here's the Chinese system of Weibo, the WeChat, and Alibaba's, and what have you. And it seems like in Latin America, we're just users, and when it comes to regulation, we just wait to see what Europe will say to copy-paste and bring to our part of the world vis-a-vis issues like security, privacy, advertising, and what have you with these gigantic platforms. So again, where's the Indian presence? And I can tell you what happens in India and countries like Brazil even determines, and Brazil, determines a lot what the platforms do. The changes on WhatsApp only forwarding 254 messages was based on what was happening in Brazil or things that happened in India. So we're very important players, and I'm not talking Bolivia, I'm talking Latin America and India, and we have to coordinate and synchronize how we're going to deal with this world where there's two big tech superpowers with very distinct separate systems that do not intermix. The only one that is, there's a digital wall between the Chinese and the Western system. The only product that crossed that wall was the Chinese Douyin, which is made by ByteDance, which in the Western world is called TikTok, which in India has been banned. See, and for very good reasons, because it is a product that is under the purview and control of the Chinese government. And let me tell you something that is very concerning for democracy is that a product under the control of the Chinese state is becoming more and more influential with the young people that are voting in elections. So we, as a Latin American, would like to learn from China, from India. How do you see these dangers coming from the Chinese system? How do you see the difficulties of Western platforms, where a very wealthy man now owns Twitter and decides who of us can tweet what? So you are a very large market. You are much more advanced than we are in terms of technology development. You have much better people that are much more talented at this than we have in Latin America. And you have them inside of India and also inside the Western world. Because ask who runs Microsoft, who runs Google, people that came from India. So again, here, between Latin America and India, it's an opportunity to look at these issues of regulations, data platforms, what have you, and particularly when we're going into the AI world now, which we have no clue in Latin America. I'm being realistic, I'm just describing it, and it's sad, on how we're going to engage with this. I'll tell you just one thing. There's a lot of discussion on data and where should it be stored. And I think that question of whether the data is stored in Western servers in Nevada or Chinese servers in Shenzhen, and now you have to house your data in Europe or Brazil or what have you, that discussion is going to get even more difficult when we move to AI, because you're not going to be talking only about where data gets stored, but where processing gets stored. And will Latin American countries or African countries accept that when we go to digital justice systems where verdicts under the legislation of a country are rendered by artificial intelligence, and the brain is going to be housed where? Do we have the energy? Do we have the infrastructure? Do we have the regional frameworks by which we engage on the artificial intelligence discussion? And yes, the world will change more the next 5 years on the technology sphere than it's changed the last 25. We're in the fourth wave of dramatic change. I can tell you that I was a young systems engineer for IBM, and the big computer firm, and I used to install and sell big computers. And the IBM invented the personal computer. Well, Apple thinks they did. IBM has its own. And here we are. I think Apple won that based on the design of the systems and the architecture they developed. But that was the first big wave. Remember, personal computers. That was the first time you could take the young ones of us. The young ones here will not even understand what I'm saying. I used to work at the U.S. in IBM office, and the first time you could take work home was with a PC. Before, if you wanted to work, like I can work here anywhere, just on the car from the hotel, I can work on my cell phone. But back then, you had to be at the office to work. The first time you could take floppy disks and do spreadsheets or documents at home and bring them back to the office and plug in the diskettes was with a personal computer. Then we got the web revolution in the 90s, the Netscapes, the Web 2 platforms and what have you. Then we got the cell phones in 2007, and now we have the AI dramatic change. And I can tell you, if another trivia question, if you want to win a bet, I don't know about India, maybe, but in Latin America, I guarantee it works. I tell people, I know exactly where you were the day that the world changed on November 30th, 2022. That's the day that ChatGPT came out, and we all realized all the advances that were being made. That doesn't mean that ChatGPT is going to be the winner. Ask Motorola cell phones or MySpace, first mover doesn't always prevail. It'll be a fierce competition amongst, unfortunately, mainly Western platforms and China-based platforms. So where are we, Latin America and India, and how are we going to deal with this, with AI? But that day that came out, I was telling you, in Latin America, I go around saying, I know exactly where you were. People go, oh, when? November 30th. That's when ChatGPT came out. Yeah, I know where you were. You were in front of a television watching Argentina in Qatar World Cup about to be eliminated by Mexico. Because had they lost that game, they would have gone home. Goodbye, Messi. No world champions. Soccer history would have changed. So I don't know about maybe you in India, perhaps not as much, but in Latin America, we were all, because we were fellow countries, right? Argentina was playing Mexico. And we were all watching that, and Messi scored the goal. Okay, so they survived, and then they went on to win the World Cup. That's the day the world changed, not because of the Messi goal, because of ChatGPT came out. And the last point on energy. Yes, there's a lot of discussion on climate change, There's a lot of preaching, very little practicing. But I can tell you two things about this that are important to know. One is China is leading the world in solar and wind by a mile. And I had not been, we're talking with the professor, COVID is like a reset, right? Alt, Control, Delete, and reset everything. So I was thinking, when was the last time I was in China? When was the last time I was in India? When was the last time I was in Africa? And you always have to say, well, it's at least 5 years back because we couldn't go anywhere for such a long time. And China was closed for a long time. And I was just there in September. And of course, I used to go 2-3 times a year. You don't go somewhere 5 years and you notice, the thing that you notice immediately, the number of EV cars with lithium batteries on the road. This buzz that you hear in Delhi when you're on the car, this buzz of the gas-fired cars and motorcycles. I'm not hearing it in China. I didn't hear it in Hangzhou. I didn't hear it in Guangzhou. I didn't hear it in Hainan, the cities in Hainan or Beijing. And with very good thinking, strategic thinking, all the EV cars with lithium batteries have green license plates. A, B, C, D, E with the lithium battery cars, purely electric, and F, G, H, whatever else with the hybrid cars. And it visually is impacting because it's the people with the regular blue license plates, not the green license plates, are starting to look in China like the people that used to smoke in restaurants. Like, oh, no, you smoke, professor? No, go to the corner over there. Now you can't even, if you take out a cigarette, it's like taking out a gun. They grab you. But it has this visual impact of sending the message, these are toxic. These are polluting. And it's the number of cars is amazing. I can tell you also this going towards the future, and this is specific to my country and to other countries. Lithium will dominate, will be very important in the world and will dominate mobility and connectivity. I would challenge you to think of the following when you go home. How many, here's one lithium battery, here's two. How many lithium batteries do you have? I don't have an EV car yet, but hope to soon. How many lithium batteries do you think I have in my backpack that I come with here and travel? 9. I have 9 lithium batteries. I have the 2 cell phones. I have the iPad, the tablet, and the iPod. For the young people, I don't know why Apple discontinued the iPod. To me, it was the best product. I'm a compulsive jogger, and I like the little thing. I don't like the phone. I like just the music, and I have my songs saved from before your parents were born and everything. And why did this? I don't know. But I have the 2 cell phones, the iPad, the iPod. I have the headphones, the wireless one for the Zooms, and then the ones for the plane. I have the watch. I have the recharger. I have the Kindle. I'm a compulsive reader, so there you go. 9 lithium batteries. And now they're coming to motorcycles, to e-bikes, to cars, to planes, to boats. Over 60% of the world's lithium supply as of now is in a triangle between Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia. That's the good news for us. But on the flip side, to make a lithium battery, I'm not going to dwell on the technical details, but think of it the following way. I try to explain it in simple terms. We have to follow lithium, you understand. I'm an engineer, and my country has 25% of the world's lithium, very important for us to be up to speed on what's happening. A lithium battery, in essence, the way it generates and stores energy is like a tennis match with 2 players, the one from Iran, the Ayatollah, and then on the other side, Djokovic with the rackets. The Iranian is Khomani, cobalt, manganese, nickel on the racket, on the cathode. On the anode, graphite, Djokovic, the rackets. Now, the racket technology may change, right? You're going to iron phosphate, you're going to solid state, but it is a racket game. And the lithium is the tennis balls. They go back. It's a very weird tennis game in that all the balls go from one side to the other, and then you recharge the phone, you plug it in, and they go back the other way. You use it, discharge, charge, discharge. But the lithium are the balls. Guess who's refining between 65 to 93% of everything I just mentioned? Nickel, cobalt, manganese, graphite, lithium. China. Guess who's making 55% of the EV cars in the world? China. Guess who's making 2/3 of the lithium batteries that we have? We all have them. China. So again, we have the lithium. China has the massive market. India has the massive market as big as China. It has the technological wherewithal. It can make decisions that would be very difficult for a small developing country to make. I can tell you, in a Latin American country, for somebody to politically suggest that they ban TikTok because under control of the Chinese government is like committing suicide with the young voters, and not many politicians are suicidal when it comes to that. Even in the US, they cannot do what you did. And you've been very aggressive as a country on saying, we want to develop our own cell phone architecture. And you've taken decisions that can be questioned or not, but you have the massive, the market, you have the muscle to be able to do some of those things. So in this world of tech, AI regulation, where are the processors going to be stored? On the clean energy, the lithium batteries, I would suggest the most essential partnership going up ahead against these two big poles that are US and China on technology with the big regulator that is Europe. There's a lot of work that we can do together. So anyway, that's my message, Professor. I think when it comes to trade, and we see bigger Western blocs being closed for business, and China being very aggressive, I suggest India has an opportunity. Development, the same thing, the same way. On technology and energy, there's a wide opening for us to work together. And I would like to, maybe one day in Latin America, we take up cricket and we come to the World Cups. Perhaps that would generate more bonds. But let's start with developing, let's start with tech, let's start with energy, let's start with trade, and then maybe one day we'll learn how to play cricket and come to India and play you in cricket. Well, maybe we'll have some Messi for crickets. But thank you, Professor, and I'm ready for the questions and the discussion.
Thank you so much. Very interesting, very provocative, and very interestingly put, Excellency. I thought you made three broad points which came out across the four axes that you elucidated. The point about the space that has opened up for middle powers, Latin America, India, at a time when we are looking at great power contestation, sharpening, great power rivalries becoming very potent. I think this aspect, which perhaps has been India's stand as well during the G20, that where is the global South? What is the voice of the global South? How can that be represented? I think that space is opened up, and the way you engaged with the question of India, Latin America, perhaps alludes to that. And the other issue, which is related, is what is happening to the multilateral institutions, and how do we reframe multilateral institutions to respond to the challenges of our times. I think you talked about it in the context of the developmental institutions, but that is applicable across the board to whatever we are looking at the moment as a result of this balance of power change. And finally, I think the idea of the emerging areas like tech, energy, who shapes the norms, who shapes the rules, and is the global South, is India and Latin America as partners sitting at the table and making those norms, or are we just accepting the norms made by others, rules made by others? I think if you think in those in those terms, you can see the partnership that is needed between India and Latin America, and that perhaps can shape the trajectory of and give this relationship a lot more heft than it has shown in the past. Before I open this up, I would like you to talk about two things. One, Excellency, is you have a very interesting relationship with Russia. And I would, in the sense of Russia is also part of a number of your, I think, lithium agreements you have signed with Russia. You have, and of course, the Russia-Ukraine crisis has also been a major factor in the way the global South has been galvanized. I think the West has often complained about West's narrative not being accepted by the global South, and I think both in Latin America and in India we see that there is a position which is distinct from Western position. So how do you look at this crisis and its global ramifications from the point of view of economy or strategy? The other issue which I think you alluded to is when you're looking at Brazil's G20, what are your expectations as part of Latin America? Because India and Indonesia, from which India took on the presidency, had a certain argument about the global south, and Brazil has said that they want to take it forward. But as a member of a geography that from where Brazil comes, and where I think there'll be a lot of focus on during the Brazil's presidency, what are your expectations and how you want this G20 that Brazil will lead to make contributions towards what Latin American priorities? If you can briefly talk about some of those issues, it would be very useful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor, for a very great summary, very quick. It's like a ChatGPT summary of my intervention. On the 2 points that you mentioned, first on Russia. In terms of my country, and of course I'm in opposition to the current government, and it breaks my heart to see alignment for political reasons with absolutely no business, cultural, or national interest justification or foundation for it. In what regard? Yes, lithium is very important for my country. As I said, China is a very big player. We cannot pretend that it's not. There's others in the world. But Russia knows about as much as lithium batteries as I know about space travel. They're not really a player. It's more for a geopolitical alignment. Is how do you proclaim to the world, like the current government of Bolivia is trying to do, following the lead of Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua, how do you say I'm anti-US? Oh, because I am friends of Russia. So that's a political alignment that is being led by Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua that have 3 authoritarian governments that do not live by or apply the democratic clauses that we have in the region. India is, however imperfect, with however many difficulties, a democracy. That's perhaps the point that I should have emphasized more at the beginning. Why should Latin America and India work together? Because we have imperfect democracies. Yes, we have work to do in Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and other countries as well. Yes, you have work to do. But the difference with China, a single-party state, is that we can work in a democratic framework, getting the peoples behind it, and we can worry about the effect that technology or artificial intelligence can have in campaigns. Whereas in China, of course, there are no campaigns. In Russia, there are no campaigns. And I would say that about Ukraine, Professor, what the issue to me was couched wrong in not the best of ways by particularly the US and Europe. I understand that for domestic reasons in the US, the government said the Ukraine struggle, or this Ukraine fight it's about autocracy versus democracy, which was an inherent contradiction right off the bat. The US and Europe saying it's autocracy versus democracy. Oh, Turkey, oh, Qatar, oh, Gulf states, oh, Vietnam, would you like to help us in this autocracy versus democracy thing that doesn't go very far? They could have made that argument in Latin America, perhaps to India, but not necessarily to a lot of the UN memberships, when the issue is about something we understand, Professor, very well in Latin America. Territorial integrity and respect to your sovereignty from the brutal, murderous invasion of a colonial power. That we understand in Latin America. Perhaps that would resonate more in India and Southeast Asia. I know for a fact that we have to be, it's sacrosanct in Latin America. Because, if not, what are we going to do? Mexico used to have California and Texas. What else does the U.S. want? Nueva León, Monterrey. I mean, that is something that we understand. So long as it was couched as a Western versus Russia, autocracy against democracy thing, it provided a way in for countries in Latin America, where the Bolivian government unfortunately followed, to take the side of Russia against the Western world, as opposed to are you or not for the respect of territorial integrity and sovereignty. The most dear cause for my country is we lost half our land. Bolivia used to be twice as big. We used to be over 2 million square kilometers. We're about half of it, a little more than half of it. We lost land to Brazil, to Paraguay, we lost land to Argentina, and we lost our seacoast to the Pacific. We're landlocked because of that. That, to us, getting back to the seacoast is not just a historical redemption, but also a economic need. How do you ship the soybeans, the lithium batteries? We have iron ore deposits. If you make them into steel, you need ports, as you know very well, and we're landlocked. So we should be all for the respect of territorial integrity. China should, by the way, also be for that principle, because you always hear them talk a lot about Hong Kong and then Taiwan. So why are they letting Russia seize Crimea and the Donbass and being neutral or somewhat about that? So I think when you couch it that way, it's easier. And unfortunately, since this has become another one of those dividing issues on the West versus whoever else you want to say, but clearly Russia is there. India has no direct beef on that. We don't have a direct beef on that except for respecting the principles. That, to your second point, it really damages the possibility to do integration. I think India handled masterfully the G20 in terms of not letting it be hijacked by, are you with Ukraine or against Ukraine issue? I am diehard for Ukraine and have them prevail and having their territorial integrity respected, because that's what I believe as a Latin American. And I think that Russia is a pernicious influence in Europe and in Latin America, in Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. And I want my friends that are fighting for democracy in Venezuela to prevail. Russia has a lot of influence on the Venezuelan government. So for a lot of reasons, I am diehard completely on the side of Ukraine. But I understand that when you go to events like this, instead of discussing everything that you so wonderfully summarized, how do the middle powers engage in the conversation with the world? How do we reform multilateral institutions to make them more responsive to Africa, to Latin America, to South Asia? How do we deal on the challenges of tech and where's the AI brains are going to be housed, and what are the parameters or legislation for security and data and privacy? How do we deal with social media tools that are either run by very wealthy, gigantic corporations in the United States or under the purview of the Chinese state, Instagrams or TikToks? I mean, how do we make sure that in the clean energy world, we don't wind up with a monopoly of Chinese production on lithium batteries? There's so many things that get put on the back burner, Professor, because something else comes in. And I'll close with a very sad example. We had the EU Latin America summit in Brussels a few weeks ago. And all these things that I'm talking about, I would have liked to see them on the table. I went to plenty of meetings saying we need to talk about this, that, and particularly, it's time to say Europe, the trade integration with Mercosur. We have been dating, we have been going out to the movies, we have been dancing for a long, long time. When are we going to get married? And instead of discussing that, it was, what are we going to say about the Russia invasion of Ukraine? And of course, sadly, countries that are outright dictatorships like Nicaragua said, I'm not signing a document if you put the word Russia into it. So 2 days go by, and we don't talk about trade, we don't talk about climate change, we don't talk about digital regulation. All we talk about is the word Russia and invasion, because Nicaragua is doing Putin's bidding in that word. So integration is severely damaged. That as a warning, in that I think in Brazil, if you ask me a point of concern, there will be a tendency to have the G20 again gyrate around that. So I would hope that we can do a copy-paste from Indian diplomacy and management of the G20, so the issues that you summarized at the beginning are on the table in Brazil, and we do not have a repeat in Brazil at the G20 of what we saw in Brussels at the EU and Latin American summit that was hijacked based on one word, Russia, and the issues that we care about were neglected.
I know there are there'll be lots of questions, but before I go to them, there's one more aspect that I think it would be useful for us to hear from you. You talked a bit about Mercosur and regional economic integration in Latin America. I think it would be fair to say that Latin America is still ahead of South Asia. We are very least integrated region in the world. We have not done very well in terms of regional economic integration. How is Latin America doing? There are often varied accounts of how effective Mercosur has been, how effective Latin American countries have been when it comes to intra-regional integration. Where do you see this going? And is at a time when we are looking at even regional organizations fracturing and fragmenting, what is the future of Mercosur? What is the future of regional integration in Latin America?
Well, thank you, Professor. Good question. And I would suggest the following. If in India, when you look at the Asian region, you think you want to work on integration arrangements, I would suggest looking more at Europe and not so much at the internal South America, because we in Latin America, we're good talkers, but not good practicers. Yes, we demand trade opening and integration, and the Mercosur trade arrangement is not the best. It's a protectionist scheme, if you ask me, where Brazil and Argentina in particular were trying to say, I want to protect my industrial sectors from Europe and China and India, so I will have high external common tariffs to protect our markets, so I can sell you expensive and you can sell me expensive. That is not a good sustainable trade integration mechanism. I always say that Mercosur only works well in the front line of European soccer teams. That's the only place where, Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil play well together in the front line of Barcelona. Messi, Neymar, Suarez. Trade inside of Mercosur is no tariffs. This guy's scoring too many goals. Block him. Make the goal bigger, make the goal smaller, and it's not the best example. That's why doing trade integration with bigger blocks than Mercosur is very sorely needed, because, Professor, that in and of itself creates arrangements that are more binding than the internal little things that we have. And here's the word of warning. I was in Europe a while ago. I said, if we don't do the EU-Mercosur, which will do more to open up Mercosur, which we need to, beware that China will come in. And guess what trade agreements always contain? Clauses and stipulations on intellectual property, on regulation, on government procurement, which will be locked in for a long time. So, the diplomatic parlor game in the US, who lost Vietnam or whatever else, in Europe, that will happen. Who lost South America? I tell them. It'll be the European Union in the year 2023, when it was clear that we did not make headway in this regard, and we went and did a trade arrangement with China. So now the opportunity is there for India to engage. And the last point on Mercosur, and in South America, that makes integration different is that we like grandiose statements. You may have heard South American government presidents say, "Oh, we have to have a common currency." Oh, you get a big headline with that. And we'll start using the yuan, or we'll start using other currency. We don't want to use the dollar so much. You get a big headline. And then the reality is that integration is very difficult when you hide behind grandiose statements like I mentioned. And the reality is that Argentina in Mercosur has more exchange rates for the dollar than great soccer players. If you go to an Argentina news outlet, they have different exchange rates of the dollar for internal reasons, for internal uses, for soybean, for concerts, for soccer players, for oil, for gas, for the street, anywhere from 350 to 920. It's just completely in disarray. So when you have that, you understand that makes integration very, very difficult. I can tell you one time, Professor, in the other part, on the Andean part, Ecuador, Venezuela, they're talking, we got to have a single currency. And the ones espousing it were the then president of Ecuador with the then president of Venezuela and Bolivia. And, a lot of times the journalists and the media, they get taken by this, right? It's a grandiose headline. The ALBA is called the Bolivarian bloc. We're going to have a regional currency, Sucre. In Spanish, Sistema Único de Cambio Recíproco, the acronym. They're very good at marketing acronyms. He's the second greatest figure in the Andean part, liberated my country. The capital of my country is called Sucre for him. My country is called Bolivia for Bolivar, to Venezuelans. So when you come up with a name like that, all the press goes, oh, we'll have an Andean currency. It'd be called the Sucre, Sistema Único de Cambio Recíproco. That sounds good. And then I say, wait, stop. Tell me how you're going to do integration between three countries, Venezuela that has multiple exchange rates, Bolivia that has only one, an Ecuador that has no exchange rate because it's dollarized. And just the first thing you had, how are we going to have a common currency when we have that completely divergent sets of things? So I would be, to summarize, I would be very leery of using Mercosur as a wonderful example. It does not function very well. And that's why doing trade agreements with bigger blocks like Europe or India or China, to me, would be a quicker, would create more internal integration than if we're just let it flow from our own desires. And in Asia, if you're going to try to, as India, as the rising power and the dominant power by far here, I would talk more to, how did Germany and France push many countries based on steel to do integration. And I think India has the muscle to drive those changes here in the Asian part of the world, perhaps learning more with all the defects that it may have from European integration. And from Mercosur, just learn from them on the soccer field, but not on the trade sphere.
Thank you. So this is now open for your questions, comments, observations. Please be brief, introduce yourselves, and then raise the question or the observation. Okay. You can use it.
My name is Sanjay Shrikant. I just joined ORF 2 days ago. So Bolivia has 23 million tons of lithium, which is the largest in the world in the salt flats, which is truly an enviable position given all the secular forces that lithium has. EV sales have gone from 4% in 2020 to about 12% in 2022, which is projected to rise to almost 30% by 2030. But lithium extraction is very water intensive and requires an estimated 2 million liters of water per ton. We have seen some protests in Argentina by indigenous groups who fear the impact of this on land and local ecosystems. So how would you reconcile these two fundamentally divergent viewpoints, one of modern industrial society and one of indigenous society who see the land more as a custodian?
So my name is Sahil Mahmood, and I'm representing Amity Institute of International Studies. And I have a question for Your Excellency. You mentioned how the chiefs and the heads of most financial institutions and organizations are primarily American or European. Does India's attempts to bridge the gap between the global North and South create an opening for South American, African, and underrepresented countries to gain representation at the highest levels? And what would be the approach to achieving that representation?
Hola, namaskar, sir. His Excellency, my name is Utkarsh Garg, and I am also from Amity Institute of International Studies, Amity University, Uttar Pradesh. I am currently pursuing Bachelor's of Arts in International Relations with Research, second year. My question to you is, His Excellency, is that as far as India and Bolivia and Latin American countries' relations are concerned, I have to quote about the recent visit of our Minister of State for External Affairs, Ms. Meenakshi Lekhi, who visited Bolivia on January 2023. And she also held meeting with the Foreign Minister of Bolivia. She quoted, she had a constructive meeting with Bolivia's Foreign Minister, Rogelio Maita, and reviewed issues of cooperation in bilateral, regional, and multilateral spheres, reaffirmed the commitment to expand friendly ties. So, as far as we know that India is raising voice for the global South, and which includes Latin American countries like Brazil, Bolivia, Guatemala, El Salvador, Cuba, and also we can also help in the sports diplomacy in context of football, India is also emerging in football, and we can have a collaboration. And as far as India is concerned, India had its G20 presidency. Now it's hand over to Brazil, which is representing most of the Latin American countries. So how?
Yeah. Just get to the question. What's the question?
So how do you look at the this relation of India and Latin America, especially in context of Bolivian trade, financial development, and all the fields?
Okay, all right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. First on the lithium and sustainable exploitation of lithium. There's always a discussion on any activity that you undertake in terms of how do you make it sustainable and not damage the climate or minimize the effects on climate. I'll give you one example. My country used to be, we're running out of gas, very important on gas. And we had those same discussions. And you have to look at it globally and long term. Is gas perfect? No, but it's a lot better than liquid fuels because it has a third less emissions than oil, half as much in terms of emissions as coal, and gas, because of the fracking revolution in the US, was very competitive in terms of pricing. And in the US, they have regained industrial competitiveness because to light up a room like this in the US cost a quarter than it would cost in Europe with when they had Russian gas, and now with non-Russian gas is even a bit higher. So yes, I mean, it's a good transition fuel. Now, if you want to get to a sustainable world, you need more lithium mobility and connectivity. And when you plug the devices into the wall, the other side should be cleanly generated. Now, that long-term challenge is something that we all have to work together on. There's too much finger pointing on this. This is the fault of China, the fault of India. India has too many coal things, too many coal plants, or China has still too many coal plants, and we keep doing the finger pointing. But the reality is that the world is changing. You cited some of the figures on EV cars. Unfortunately, in South America, we're the last to use what we have. We have so much gas, and except for Argentina, as the ambassador knows, most of the cars were fuel-fired, liquid fuel-fired, as opposed to compressed natural gas that they use in Argentina, which are better than fuel-fired cars. But now we have the lithium. So the first point is on how to make it sustainable. There are ways in which to sustainably develop those resources. I understand, particularly in my country, Bolivia, if you Google map Bolivia and you see it, Salar de Uyuni is a beautiful place. It's a white desert, 4,000 meter high. And my daughter works at Google in California, and she's sitting with her friends. And when I talk about lithium, they say, oh, but it looks so beautiful, and don't touch it, and don't use the lithium. I say, okay, give me your cell phones. I'll take away your cell phones. Because if we're going to take it to let's not touch anything, let's not develop lithium, okay, then let's keep... Somebody, you got to move. Somehow you got to move. Somehow you got to talk. Somehow you got to connect. And do we do it with a fossil fuel-based economy, or do we do it with a clean power, clean generation energy with lithium batteries? And there are costs. There's no way, it's not zero cost in terms of the environment and the climate, but the world of clean power in terms of generation and lithium batteries and the mobility and connectivity is much better, and the only way in which you can achieve the COP climate emission reductions targets. Now, having said that, of course, you have to make sure... Yeah. Yeah, it's a different company. It's called YLB. Comibol is the traditional mining state company. In Bolivia is the lithium company that is doing that. I think there's a lot, quite frankly, and I say this sadly, there's a lot of politics behind it. First, in Bolivia, we had an arrangement with a German company that was not very transparent. There were protests. The Germans were thrown out, not from Comibol, from YLB, is called the company that's doing it. Now they signed agreements that nobody discloses, and the Congress has not seen, with Chinese companies, with Russian companies that are more political than anything else. So anyway, to wrap up this point on the question, yes, I mean, there are issues on environmental sustainability no matter what you do. Mining, zinc, tin, copper, lead, gas, soybeans, sugar, whatever else you do. Globally, where the world is going, if as a planet we want to reduce the emissions to make the climate sustainable, we have to pick continue down the fossil fuel path, or do we go to clean energy generation with lithium batteries that hopefully will be the dominating technology, which will not be exempt or without costs, but they'll be a lot lower when you compare them globally. If not, because you cannot do the comparison saying, let's all stay home, let's all turn off the lights, no one have cell phones, no one have cars. That world does not exist. People are going to move, talk, and communicate. How do we do it sustainably? To me, it's better with the lithium and clean power. On the IMF and the World Bank, the question on what India can do, I think India is the key player when it comes to this. because it is the country with the heft, the size, the political and economic influence, and the democratic credentials to engage with the US and Europe to talk about multilateral reform. Because, yes, it is completely unthinkable that, let's see, how old are you here? 19. Okay, when you get to be my age, or roughly, it'll be 44 years from now. So in the year 2067, imagine that, when you're my age, is it conceivable that India is not on the UN Security Council on a permanent basis? Absolutely not. So now, when does that exactly change? I don't know, but it better be sooner to 2023 than by the time you turn to be my age in 2066, 67, whenever you get there. So those things have to change. Is it conceivable that when you are my age, the development of the world will be in the hands of two institutions with diminished economic presence from nations that have the monopoly on the executive decision-making power? I'm talking about the World Bank and the IMF. No, because if that continues to happen, they'll become so dysfunctional that it will just be talking shops. There won't be real tools for multilateral development, which goes to the last question as well in terms of what India can do. I think those long-term discussions on the multilateral reforms have to be led by India, with Latin America next to it and Africa with it too. The reality is, since the UN does not work, we keep making other arrangements. So we had the G7, if you wanted to talk about development, capital infusions of resources to multilateral institutions, trade issues, financial rescues of banks. Where did you go talk about that? In the G7 or G8, and I forget what it is now. Then we moved to a G20, which is better. And now it's a more effective tool. So if when we're lacking reform of multilateral institutions, we come up with these ad hoc mechanisms that prove to be more effective. So now here's the vehicle. And India showed that it can be leveraged to discuss the issues for the emerging, middle, and developing countries. And why does India have an opening to do that better than China? Because China has issues on that vis-a-vis the lending they have done and the fact that countries cannot pay it back. And I can tell you from experience, I am the world champion as percent of the GDP of debt reduction. I worked and eliminated all our private debt at 11 cents on the dollar with commercial banks and all the bonds. All the bilateral debt, like the Rocky movies, 1, 2, 3, Paris Club, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I did about 3 or 4 of those. We wrote it all off. HIPIC, almost like the Godfather movie, not the Rocky movies. HIPIC 1, 2, 3. And we reduced all the multilateral debt at the beginning of the century. And I can tell you from having dealt that, you had to talk to the US Congress, the EU Parliament, the European nations, and what have you. When we move forward, how do we reform those institutions so they can respond to today's global challenges? And I think the partnership between India and Latin America that has been, by luck of the draw, generated by India and Brazil being the G20 chairs, provides the best opening and window of opportunity to engage on those types of discussions. And why do I make this point so much? Is that China has been lending money. And China, when you go to Europe and the US, oh, they're a single party state, they're not democratic. No one can say that to India. No, is it perfect? No. But it is a democratic, large, big power, the number one in population, maybe the number one in cricket. And with Latin America, we're number one in soccer, but but we have lots of lithium. So how do we engage on this discussion with China, the US, and Europe? I think there is an opening, and I think India should seize it. And I think the best opportunity is on the run-up to the next G20 summit when they're passing the baton. Hopefully, and I really hope, it is not a one-off thing where we do that and say goodbye, and you're this magical, mystical, gigantic land that we see from afar, but we do not use this G20 passing of the baton to build like a permanent rope to link us together. The ambassador has been to my country, I think. I like to climb mountains. I still do. And I can tell you climate change is real because the snow line in Illimani, Huayna Potosí, when I go climb, is moved up almost 200 meters in the last 30 years. That's not a mountaineering issue. That is a water supply issue because the glaciers are melting. So we have to do something. But when you climb, I said I'm decisive but not suicidal. I always go with a rope tied to a guide who made Everest, Guarachi, the best climber that I've ever met. So I have a rope, very close. That's what I suggest the G20 passing of the baton ought to be. A rope that permanently links you so you can take the challenge of going to the summit of multilateral reform, development, and trade between India and Latin America.
Your Excellency,
Brief and to the point. Yes, so that we can
I'm Deepak Kumar Sharma, a student at Delhi University, currently pursuing Bachelor of Arts. Sir, you mentioned how certain countries are dominating world organizations, and one example of that is United Nations Security Council. Sir, India has been long advocating for reforms in the Security Council, like other G4 nations. I wanted to know what you think is the way forward on this issue.
Okay.
Good afternoon, His Excellency. My name is Rahul Kumar, and I'm a master's student of Jawaharlal Nehru University from International Relations. So, sir, my observation and the question is, by the end of the 20th century, India was a distant and insignificant market for Latin America. India image has been seen as a gradual change in Latin America in the 21st century, but most people in the region are still not acquainted with the contemporary reality of India. And at the same time, the Latin American region remain far outside India's foreign policy priorities that we can see. But recent change have been seen that our foreign policy more oriented toward the region. So, sir, my question is what do you think is the real challenge? The physical distance that separate India and Latin America, or rather, it is the distance in the perception that both the countries have? Thank you, sir.
I am Shabdaini, sir. I am an IR enthusiast from Amity. My question to His Excellency is that in terms of receiving aids and assistance, Latin America has been dealt with a hand which is where integrated programs have been such as under the Europanna. So among the neighborhood tensions, as you mentioned, the challenges and that there are with the regional integration, what way that has been charted out to collaborate and deal with issues that commonly are critical for all in the region?
Good evening, sir. I'm Abhinav Anurag from Amity Institute of International Studies. And my question to you is regarding China. So as you mentioned about its trade policy, aggressive trade policy and aggressive lending, so China uses a debt trap policy, as we saw in the case of Sri Lankan crisis. And so, sir, I think it would be using the same in Latin American countries. So how do you think you would counter that? And sir, I have a more question. Sir, Argentina, one of your neighbors, recently joined BRICS. So, sir, is Bolivia looking forward to join a BRICS economic alliance?
over to you.
Okay, thank you. Very good questions. Thank you. First, on the UN Security Council, yes, it is. I always say the UN Security Council is where issues that are very challenging for the world, where they go to fall asleep and never get solved. Whether it's Ukraine or any crisis that you've had, that's where they go and never come out, because you have the permanent five that have a veto power. So nothing ever moves through that. And it needs reform. And as I was telling in the previous answer, that by the time she gets to be my age, this has to be reformed. Exactly how that happens, I don't know, but I know it'll only happen if India, Latin America, and Africa work together to demand that it changes. And either it changes, and it's better to change existing institutions, or new ones will be created. Whatever, G77 plus something else, new ones will be created. And the saddest example of the dysfunctionality of the Security Council to me is vaccines. When COVID came around, you do Zoom events, of course, but do a lot of these Zoom conversations. And I thought, here's an issue that the UN will be able to address. Because as opposed to Ukraine, Iraq, financial crisis, and what have you, the 5 veto-wielding permanent members each have something to contribute. A vaccine, a Russian vaccine, Sputnik, China vaccine, Sinovac, European and US vaccines, Moderna's, Pfizer. So you would think, facing a incredible crisis like COVID, UN has an opportunity to say the five veto members saying, how many vaccines does the world need? Where will I use Russian vaccines? Where will I use Chinese vaccines? Because yes, there's difference in quality, I understand, but any vaccine was better than no vaccine and having none. And instead of coordination, and India, you know a lot about this, the lives are more important than patents. And India certainly is the global champion and having shown the world. Brazil also to an extent that lives are more important, human lives are more important than patents. So how do we go about, giving licenses or patents for vaccines, manufacturing, India, Brazil, Mexico, and here maybe in Mexico I'll manufacture in the Pfizers, and maybe in Brazil I will do the Rush, whatever. But how do we address this? Solving this vaccine challenge that we had. And instead of doing that, which was a wonderful opportunity, we had this vaccine nationalism campaign where the Western world said, first I will vaccinate my own people, and I got to have 10 doses for each one of my country members or my population, and then I will give you whatever I have left over. And then that game started being played, and I think that just goes to show you that it cannot continue to work that way, and it will only change if India, Latin America, and Africa, under the leadership of India, decide to move it. Because I think, yes, we're all national, sovereign countries, but we all recognize that India, because of its heft and being the largest country population-wise in the world, has to lead this effort. The markets, the question of markets and how it goes. I would suggest, it's always the chicken or the egg. India, Latin America, do we come up with trade integration mechanism first to generate the trade, or do we wait for trade to spontaneously and naturally move over and then try to develop a framework? That's a typical question when you look at that. I would suggest it is better to use, I'll use the Brazilian pipeline example. My country, Bolivia, had a little bit of gas, but not enough for the large Brazilian market. Brazil and Sao Paulo had lots of energy demand, but it had not developed the gas distribution. So which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Would we have to wait until Brazil developed its gas distribution network and Bolivia certified its gas reserves to build a pipeline, or do we build a pipeline sending the world a signal that there will be lots of gas and bring companies to Bolivia to invest and discover, which happened, lots of gas, and have Brazil develop its network distribution? So that's how we did things. So had we waited for Bolivia to have enough certified gas reserves and Brazil to have developed its market, we still would have been waiting. And we built a pipeline that bound us together, and it worked very well, and it cleaned up a lot of the emissions from dirty fuels in Brazil. Gas was better than the dirty fuels. So I would suggest also that this is the way to do it with India and Latin America. Yes, China is a big market for our commodities. Yes, China has great manufacturing capacity, so there's a need. But China was very strategic about first putting in place the WTO accession recognition and then developing trade frameworks to unleash the market partnership. So I would suggest with India, use the Bolivia-Brazil pipeline. Do the framework first, and then people will say, okay, I'm in South America. India has more people than China. I want to sell them wine from Argentina, a salmon from Chile, so whatever, do the lithium, whatever, and then that will create the opportunities for us. On aid and assistance, the question from on how to collaborate, again, I think you need, beyond what you can do bilaterally, and there's room for India when it becomes larger to start doing its own collaboration with the developing world, we should look at the common sets of standards that have to do with the way it currently works. I'll give you one example that I had in life. We got multilateral debt relief. We got debt written off. And I won't bore you in the details, but when you run the finance area, I came up through that area. You got to do IMF accounting of your economy, your national accounts, based on Western principles. So you had interest payments on debt were what's called over the line, right? Like your salary and then however much you spend, and it's got to balance out, right? Because if you have a deficit as a person, you go broke. If you have a deficit as a country, you borrow until you cannot borrow anymore, and then you go broke, like has happened in Argentina and what have you. So when you do the accounting, the interest expenses go what's called over the line, and the capital payments go under the line. That's funding. So to make a complicated story simpler, my country, for the sake of argument, let's say a country has 0.5% of GDP on interest payments and 1% in capital payments. If you get debt relief, and that was conditioned upon us using that as a donation to do health and education, you, accounting-wise, look like you were driving up expenses because the capital disbursements moved over the line and it looked like expenditures. So having 1.5% of GDP per year written off to use for health and education, that country, mine, was better off. But yet accounting-wise, you were bringing in the capital disbursements up over the line because of the Western IMF, World Bank accounting, and it looked like your fiscal deficit had gone up, and the IMF would come in and strangle you and say, oh, you got to do some adjustments. Why? Is a country that is not paying interest, not paying capital, and using that money, keeping it in-house, saving the foreign currency to do health and education, is much better. So I had to go to believe it or not, to the IMF and the World Bank board to show him this, because I was told, I kind of say, I always ask why. Young people always ask why, keep asking why. Because no, you can't go to the board. Why? The staff has to do that, the IMF, the World Bank. But it's my country. I can make my case. I speak English. I got slides. I can go, oh, it's never been done. Well, I want to do it. And I did go, and we finally got it through. So my point is, this should not be based on somebody taking individual initiative on donations and collaboration and multilateral reform on an ad hoc basis. It should be more structural. And the only way to make it structural is when countries have global understandings on how to change those things. And again, it begs to have India, involved, and not only China in this discussion, because China now has, as the ambassador was saying, a vested interest. And like the last question said, the debt trap. Yes, I know in Latin America, we still have not seen it yet. Of course, I follow it. I see what happened with Sri Lanka, what happens with African countries. And that's a headline I like to see one day in Latin America, quite frankly. Maldives, I haven't been to that. I know it's beautiful, but I like the headline, a pro-India versus a pro-China candidate. Not that I like the characterization, it may not respond to reality, but at least it's better than having no options. And because China is the main buyer in South America for commodities. And yes, it's not democratic. Yes, and we have the democratic charter. I am very particular about this, or very specific about this. I demand that in Latin America, we all abide by the principles of our regional understanding: free and fair elections, independent institutions, freedom of expression, alternation in power, because that's what we signed up to do in Latin America, like they did in Europe. Africa doesn't have those arrangements. Asia does not have those arrangements. So I demand countries in my neighborhood to abide by those principles that we signed up to. I cannot demand that of Azerbaijan or Qatar or China. But given that China has that much economic influence, it would be wonderful for Latin America to have India be as a market as interesting as its size befits for Latin America. And I saw those headlines on Maldives. I hope one day we work on the trade arrangements. I hope that, yes, when we get to the debt issues on Latin America, which we soon will, we will have, that'll bring a point of contention. Because before, it looked like China was fine. They were buying the energy, they were buying the food, they were buying the minerals, they were investing, they were lending you money, everything. When the loan gets disbursed, everybody loves the banker. When the banker comes to collect and you have difficult paying your credit card or your loan, that's when things get more difficult. And that's what determines if the partnership is structurally sound in the long term. So we will see what that happens when we get to the debt trap. And the last point on the BRICS, and Argentina joining. I mean, the Argentina president that went to BRICS is on his way out. I don't think they even bring him coffee anymore because he could run for re-election, and not even his party had him. So it's like he's just traveling, making announcements. But Argentina has elections on October 22nd. We'll see which way it goes. I think there's a lot of smoke behind the BRICS. Quite frankly, I think it is, an acronym that was creatively devised and presented by an investment banker in the UK. BRICS now, is that going to become a trade arrangement? I don't think so. I don't think Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa will be able to develop a trade framework. I, as a Latin American, will be very frank. If I want to deal with China, we deal with China. We do our trade arrangements with China. With the EU, yes, it's a block. US or NAFTA or the northern part, it is a block. South Africa, I don't really see what we're going to be talking to them so much. Russia, just get out of Ukraine. That's the only thing I would tell them if I was negotiating. India, yes, we want to engage in India. And quite frankly, I do not think that an acronym without institutional backbone is going to do it. Yes, you might say there is a bank in Shanghai run by the former president of Brazil. That's really a Chinese bank disguised with a different regional acronym. So if we want to deal with China, we will deal with China. I, as a Latin American, would like, for the long term, to establish a long-term trade investment partnership with India, not disguised under an acronym that is meaningless and has no institutional backbone, but rather with India, this large, powerful nation with its foreign ministry, with Latin America directly and not through acronyms.
Good afternoon, sir. So I'm Romil. I'm a student. So my question is how do you see the contribution of track to diplomacy in Indo-Bolivian relationship and Indo-Latin relationship in a large extent? And how to transform it into effective ground realities, the track to diplomacy?
Hello, sir. My name is Aditi and I'm from Amity University. So I have two questions, both being a little... Okay. They're in political in nature as such. So as a former president, we lately we have heard that both the presidents are right now fighting for the new presidency candidacy. We have President Evo Morales as well as President Luis. He's been recently kicked out of his party. Yeah. So what are your comments on that? And so please, second question.
Go ahead.
I would really like to know what are your comments on our Prime Minister Narendra Modi as such in terms of his leadership.
Good evening, His Excellency. I'm Samidha Jain, a student from Delhi University. So you are a champion in human rights. You have done a lot for Bolivia when it comes to human rights. So the violations which are happening in China and also in Afghanistan, and on top of that, the South China Sea issue, which connects directly Indo-Pacific region to Bolivia and South America. I would like to know your comments on these two issues about China. Thank you very much.
Good evening, sir. So I'm here. So I'm Akriti and I'm from Amity Institute of International Studies. I'm doing my master's in international relations. So my question to you is that we had seen that cryptocurrency was once a rage topic in the geopolitical arena, but it has been dying now. And a lot of Latin American countries recognize cryptocurrency. So, along with cryptocurrency comes a lot of cybersecurity threats as well. So, what are your takes on cryptocurrency and the process of de-dollarization and the efficiency in securing cybersecurity threats in the Latin American countries?
We have
Very good.
two more.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Hello, sir. My name is Ritik Bharti. I'm from Amity Institute of International Studies. And my question is, sir, could you provide insights into the historical relationship between Chile and Bolivia and shed light on whether Bolivia is considering the restoration of diplomatic relations with Chile?
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
I think the final question, right? Yeah.
Good evening, His Excellency. I'm Adityan. I'm a student of Amity Institute of International Relations and pursuing BA IR. So my question is, what are the challenges and opportunities that Indian business looking to invest in Bolivia?
Okay.
Good evening, His Excellency. I am Mohammad Rafi from Amity Institute of International Studies, pursuing my master's in international relations. Sir, my question is how Bolivia faced the COVID pandemic and how it overcome the COVID pandemic in terms of economy and healthcare, and how India contributed to the Bolivia during COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm told that there is one final.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, sir. This is Bhanu from Amity Institute of International Studies. Sorry. We understand that India adds validity to the groupings like BRICS, which is where the major geopolitical weight is shown up by China. And we also understand that the success of BRICS depends upon the bilateral ties between India and China. So how does Latin American countries help India to gain that leverage in order to foster those relationships ahead? And I also wanted to know something about the Nearshoring Act, which has been happening under the MEICO and Latin American region.
That's it? Yes. Okay, thank you. Thank you. First on how to use non-economic links to development better, I would say the following is, yes, there are no historical standing ties between India and Latin America. Perhaps the ambassador knows that well. But there's common values that perhaps are more important long-term. In other words, is looking forward when you're moving ahead is more important than looking to the rear-view mirror. Maybe we share some colonial scars, yours in English, ours in Spanish or Portuguese. We're developing countries, you're larger. So we have challenges ahead that are more important than whatever historical links we have. And I can tell you for a fact that, yes, I would like this, for example, to say Indian young people that come learn Spanish or Portuguese or Portuñol, which is our common language, we understand each other close enough. And people from India to come to school, to go to university, people from Latin America to get involved in academic engagements. I would love to have you do this forum with young people, with ORF, with young people from India, with young people from Brazil to engage, because my point here is just one. The world is so much different now. When I was your age, it was impossible to build these connections. We lived in silos. If you were Latin America and university was always suspended, you had to go to countries that had some stability in university education, go to Europe or go to the US. I went to Texas A&M. That's where you had to go where knowledge was. Now we're all interconnected. We can all befriend each other on Facebook, on Instagram, or even TikTok too. We can follow each other. So the capacity to build the connections through shared interests, it is today much higher than it ever was. So I think there's ways in which we can interact better to develop or strengthen the India-Latin American relationship, not waiting for governments to engage, but rather for civil society, for universities, for business groups to develop their links. And we have the advantage that we have opened, for example, chambers of commerce or chambers of industry. And like you do in India, that, for example, is an advantage that you have. We have a free flow of information and teaching in India and Latin America. That is not as easy to do with China, as you know. So there are ingrained advantages to develop the links that are beyond the official or multilateral channels. The question on Bolivia and the two candidates, yeah, it's this political struggle. There's an old saying in Latin America that said on planet Earth, there's animals or species with 2 feet, 4 feet, 100 feet, right? 100 pies. I don't know how you call it, 100 feet, 100 pies. But they are yet to find one with 2 heads, or no government with 2 heads. So the long history of Latin America shows you that when you have divided leadership at the top, they tend to fracture. It happened in Colombia between Uribe and Santos. It happened in Ecuador between Correa and Moreno, and it happened here. It was predictable. I won all my bets. People said Morales is the long-term leader. He's leaving Arce in place. I said they'll be at each other's throats by 2024 and the run-up to the 2025 election. So I won the bet, but I just completely missed the timing because they're already at each other's throat, because that's the nature of how things are. It's the unfortunate story is my country had the best almost 20-year run in our economic history because of things that we did in the past, basically developing the gas fields and writing off the debt. So when Morales started, he had the best of worlds. He had all credit cards, bilateral, private, and multilateral, basically with the balance that was zero, on a country that is part of a region that had chronic debt issues. And we had 2 pipelines with gas reserves and contracts tied to with prices tied to the price of oil. And basically all they had no debt. They had to open up 2 gas valves and the money would flow in from the gas. They got 23% of GDP per year opening up 2 gas valves. You have to go to the Gulf states to find a situation like that. Unfortunately, it was wasted, it was misspent, it was stolen. And now that we run out of the gas, Argentina has been our customer for 60 plus years. We don't have enough gas to sell them. We're going to stop selling them. They develop their own reserves. The supply for Brazil is in danger because they ran out of the gas. And not content with just running out of the gas, they raided the foreign currency reserves of the central bank. We're a small country, and $17.5 billion out the window since 2014 from the foreign currency reserves, plus the gold, plus the IMF SDRs, plus the pots of money that we had. So it's not a pretty sight going up ahead, but short term it is. Long term, of course, or medium term, the lithium is very promising. So what you see in Bolivia, and you'll continue to see that, is basically what we've seen in Latin America time and time again. The strong man, I wish I could say person, but it's usually a man. It's not a woman. That's the caudillo, having to, because we have term limits, and he overstepped them. Morales had the right to 2 presidential mandates. He stayed for a 3rd, violating his own constitution. He did a referendum that he lost, asking for 1 more mandate. He lost the election, the mandate, and then pretended that he had the inter-American human right to be, and I'll get to that later, to be reelected forever. Anyway, so he had to be replaced. There was fraud. Now you have 2 candidates. They're going to keep fighting and run up to 2025 till one of them prevails, and then the opposition we have the responsibility to offer a different path. As personally, the leader of India, Modi, I'm a very strong leader. I don't know more than that. You live here, you know that. But so far, I will tell you the following. Felipe Gonzalez said, democracy never guarantees you having the leader that you dream of. But what it should always guarantee you is the right to always be able to elect one in the ballot box. And so long as you have that in India and you have a leader that responds to the vote and he has to be subject to the vote again, more power to you. And I think, yes, I know you can tell me lots of problems about Indian democracy, but that's a nice discussion that you can have only when you have democracy. In countries where there's no democracy, you cannot even talk about that. And the social media apps are controlled and cannot discuss anything that is relevant. So at least if I was in India, I would be very happy that I can openly discuss the issues that have to do with democracy. On human rights and China, Afghanistan, I do the following. I live by the following principle. I talk a lot about this with the countries that I sign regional agreements with. I don't like to preach. I don't like to give lessons. We all have problems. I mean, I come from a country where, as I was telling him before, the president pretended, like Nicaragua and Honduras, that we have an inter-American human rights treaty that says everything about respecting human rights and freedom of expression and what have you. And it has an article that says every citizen has the right to be elected and vote for somebody running for office, which is very worthy and plain and simple, and who would disagree with that? Well, guess what? In Nicaragua, they used a control of the judiciary to determine that the right to be elected meant the right to be re-elected against the Constitution itself. And they copy-pasted that in Honduras. They did the same trick. And they did it in Bolivia, claiming that it was a human right to be in office forever, despite the constitutional term limits that we have on presidential systems in Latin America. I went to the Human Rights Commission in San Jose, Costa Rica, and we got a ruling that is binding for everybody that says running for office forever, being reelected forever, which erodes democracy, is not an inter-American human right. So we have issues in Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua. I have a singular distinction that I've been declared persona non grata in Venezuela twice, going to help my democratic fighting friends, which shows you the database is not very good. You should only do that once, and then kicked out of Cuba. So that's the sphere in which I fight. So we have enough problems upholding what we've signed up in Latin America for me to start saying, oh, you know what, in Qatar you ought to do this, in Afghanistan you ought to do that, in China you ought to do it. I understand that in Europe and the US they do that. I try not to do that. I hold up the countries that I signed binding agreements 22 years ago on democratic clauses and human rights to live by those, because that's where we signed them. And I don't like to go preaching to Afghanistan or to Qatar or to China, because I don't like it when they come preach to me from other latitudes. I'll leave the crypto for the end. Chile, Bolivia, diplomatic relations. As you know, it's a difficult point for my country. We lost our sea-coast access. Begs a question there. Why do we make it an issue of having lost our land to Chile and not make such an issue with Brazil, for example, where we lost a lot of land? Because my country is landlocked in the middle of South America. We're the only country that is part of the three river basins, the Andean River Basin, the Amazon River Basin, and the Chaco, the Platense River Basin. And we lost land, like I said, with like Brazil. No? I saw the government of Brazil now said, oh, Ukraine should not be so greedy. They ought to give up Crimea. Interesting position. If they're going to be so generous about that, we had a drunk, sick president almost 150 years ago. The Brazilian diplomats came, gave him a white horse, he put his thumb on a map and gave him that chunk of land, which is very big, Acre. So I said, my answer when I heard that from Brazil vis-a-vis Ukraine and Crimea was, if they're going to be so generous with Ukrainian territory, why don't they give me back the Acre? And I'll give them back the horse in terms of the land swap that we did. So why do we, I was going to the point, why do we make it an issue in Chile and not so much with Brazil? Because we lost our maritime connection. We're still an Amazonian country. We're still an Andean country. We will forever be a Platense country. But we are not today a Pacific Basin country. That is very important for Asia because we lost our seacoast. And it's not just a historical demand based on what happened a long time ago. It is an economic need. If I want to have the lithium, not replicate the cycle of exporting the commodities to South Korea, China, and Japan, so they can send me the batteries that say made in South Korea, made in India, when the lithium came from Bolivia, and I want to make the batteries in Bolivia, guess what I need? A seacoast access. So it is a demand for our future development, not because it's a historical grievance. So I hope we can come to an understanding with Chile. There's an opportunity between Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia to decide, do we want to work together on lithium, or do we want to just be content on selling to the Chinese so they can ship us back the batteries? And we'll once again replicate the boom and bust cycle of selling the commodity without adding value. Sell the copper, sell the oil, don't add the value. I think the lithium provides an opportunity to say, yes, we will sell the lithium at the market price globally, but we can create free trade zones with lower priced lithium to build the batteries and make the batteries in the southern area. I used to work at IBM in the 80s. And I remember the manager at the Boca Raton facility saying, yeah, that's IBM PC, we're going to make it open-ended. And I'm going to start driving, we're going to buy the 10 megabyte hard drive on the IBM PC, 10 megabyte, that was a lot back then. 10 megabyte, I mean, my watch has got 20 times that now. But the IBM PC hard drive in the 80s, 10 megabytes, we're going to start making it in Taiwan. Guess where they make all the PCs and all the phones now? In Asia. So that if you want to move up the chain, you can't say, I'm going to start making BYD cars or Tesla cars. Let's start step one, the hard drive on the IBM PC, the lithium batteries. Let's start making the lithium batteries. And that's the Seacoast access is very important for that. In terms of the challenges for opportunities for Bolivia investment, I would have hoped to tell you, yes, Bolivia is open for investment. I would tell you we have a current government that is very much, say, the state wants to run everything, come invest, and the state will run everything. That's not the best rule of law framework to attract investment. It's not the best of times, but hopefully that will change. But I would like to tell you my country is open for investment, but the reality it is not. We've lost a lot of investment. There's a lot of rhetoric behind the state running everything and controlling everything. And whether you're from India, China, Germany, or France, when a government says, why don't you come invest your money, the state will run the company, and hopefully one day you'll make returns. That is not a good framework to attract investment for Bolivia. On the Bolivian-Indian contribution for COVID, I tell you the best contribution that India has made to health in the world is that it is a powerhouse on generic medicine production. That showed in COVID. Yes, perhaps the patents originally came from somewhere else, but India is such a large, immense market that it has the muscle to say a life is more important than a patent. We saw that with HIV/AIDS. We saw that with COVID. And I think that's where we need to join up. If you look at the way that Brazil broke the patents for HIV/AIDS was following the lead of India. So again, I can tell you many examples of how the massive market and size you have, with a lot of the innovation capacity that you have, linking up with us benefits us. We saw that on the COVID vaccines. We saw that on the HIV/AIDS. Now we have to move to other types of technology and not just medicine-based technology. The BRICS, how to best leverage it in the world of nearshoring. I can tell you, again, I'll repeat the answer I gave. I do not believe that an acronym has long-term viability. Yes, it can become a place where they meet and they talk and gather, but we have plenty of things like that at the UN. Talking shops, we got plenty. Does BRICS have the institutional and internal arrangements to say, Bolivia, we want you to come negotiate a trade agreement with BRICS, and I will have access to the Brazil market? Wait, I already have that. Russia, not really interested. I don't have much to do with it. India, yes, very interested. China, yes, I'm very interested. But no one believes for a minute that through this arrangement, I will get India and China to agree on a trade framework for us, because India is a continent in and of itself. China is a continent in and of itself. And they can keep adding Argentina, Indonesia, and what have you, but it won't change the fact that we need an India-Latin America relationship, and I think the G20 passing of the baton is the best way to do that, because yes, clearly with what happened in COVID and China, Mexico is benefiting a lot. They're right next to the US. A lot of manufacturing is moving to Mexico. They're happy as they can be by having access to the large US market. In South America, we're far from the US. We suffer the dollar fluctuations. China has been very aggressive about doing trade. So I would suggest long-term, if India says, I will engage with Latin America behind the BRICS acronym, while China is signing trade agreements with Ecuador or with Paraguay or with Uruguay and then with Brazil, you're going to be left behind by respecting the acronym. So I would suggest you do it directly. I left for last the question on crypto, cybersecurity, de-dollarization. I think you may not, people may think what they think about crypto. There's the trial of SBF, and we'll see, and it's a scam. You can do scams on banks. Lehman Brothers was a scam. Yeah. You can do scams with companies. Enron was a scam. They came to Bolivia. You can do scams no matter what you call them. Gas delivery, Enron, banking, Lehman, crypto, FTX, and what have you. But that should not deter from looking at the following. Yes, the world will start moving to some type of digital currency. Again, India is a prime example of what you can do in terms of moving that way. In terms, the digital payment system is here. If one thing you got to respect about China is they leapfrogged. They're leapfrogging, and I'm grossly oversimplifying it, but when everybody was on a bicycle to everybody being on an EV car with lithium batteries. Yes, there was a long time in the middle where they burned gas, but in the long history of China, that was like a 50-year period. Long term, I guarantee you, if you go to China by 2035, they'll all be green license plates. So they leapfrog that. The same thing on digital. They went from paper and pencil to cell phones with very good innovative companies. And in Latin America, everybody said, oh, what's up, what's up? As a user, you can say WeChat was more advanced than WhatsApp. So they had leverage and they moved that way. They were the first mover on crypto because they were they were all the crypto companies came out of China. And then China banned it because China is a very centralized state that does not want free flow and discussion or things that the state cannot control. So the inventors of crypto based on blockchain, it was banned in China and it's in other places. I would suggest, yes, crypto, you can discuss it a lot, but blockchain is coming and it will change the way you do things. The Web3 based on blockchain, I'm telling you this because I advised a platform for still doing it for a long time, will change the world. The Web2, Web1 was me going in and saying, El País newspaper and having to look for what I wanted. Web2 is American Western aggregators, Google and Facebook, giving you the news based on what your friends were seeing, the Googles and the Facebooks, and then controlling the media, wiping out a lot of the local media and all the problems that are brought. But Web3 and blockchain will let the users regain control of what they generate, whether it's a news article, a video, an audio. It will be timestamped, birth certificate, and it will go around the world saying, you produced this, and it belongs to you, and you can monetize it, and not Google and Facebook telling you, oh, that video that you did so well, here's 2 cents for what you did, and maybe it's made a lot more money. So blockchain will bring about a lot of changes. And I can tell you, India, again, not that I want to assign you responsibilities that more than you already have, is the largest democracy in the world, will always be. Well, as far forever, right? Because China is not going to reform, and you already overtaken them in terms of population. So you will always be the largest democracy in the world. Always, I don't know about the year 3000, but let's say for the next couple centuries, you will be the largest democracy in the world. I guarantee you, one day we will be voting on blockchain. We will be voting on blockchain. There'll be no fraud. I mean, there'll be a lot less than what it is, because you can talk a lot about how blockchain lets you disguise things. No, blockchain guarantees that what a user generates, what a vote is made, is tracked forever. And because you can do money laundering with cash and through banks, but you can do scams also through cryptos and things, but you can backtrack and see where it came from. So if one day people will be with the iris scan on the cell phone, and I'll know who that person is, and it'll be a single person, and it'll be one vote, and dead people will not vote, or people will not stuff ballot boxes. Where will that change on voting on blockchain through digital media come from? Yeah, Latin America, we are democracy. You are a democracy. So there's one more thing, and thanks for the question, where we can work together on bringing about the changes that the world will bring about. And by the way, I think in Latin America, we should discuss with India things like TikTok, because we do have democracies. And you knew what it meant to have the young people using a product from a Chinese company that has Chinese state domination of it and the difficulties that can bring about. And that will continue to cause more problems because, as you know, the algorithms, and people underestimated the Chinese algorithm generation capacity. It is awesome. I saw it, we saw it coming. TikTok was better than Instagram. And people thought Chinese just copy paste, they just clone, they just replicate. No, they innovate. And they innovated a lot. And the thing you know about this is a tracking device of humans, better than the KGB, CIA, Mossad, or whatever else. It's got 15 sensors. It knows everything about a user. If I see a Real Madrid-Barcelona video, by the way I hold the phone, how I press it, my eyes, the algorithm will figure out whether I'm Real Madrid or Barcelona, or in cricket, whether you're with India, Pakistan, it will know everything. It will know how we're going to vote the night before we vote. So those are awesome, awesome capabilities. How do we address them? How do we engage with them? How do we develop blockchain voting? How do we make sure that the company behind an algorithm that know the users are not manipulating them in large democracies like India and Brazil for the sake or under the guidance of a foreign actor? And I think that will bring a lot of challenges. And again, I think India has to lead the way. Yes, we can do things. In Latin America as a whole, we are a democratic region about the size of Europe. Europe has a lot more money. We're a lot younger than Europe. We have democratic clauses. But India is bigger than Europe and Latin America put together. You're the largest democracy and will forever be. So there's things that we can learn on a digital world based on blockchain with algorithms that know our users so well on how do we best protect, strengthen, and enhance democracy.
Thank you, Excellency. In an age where students have an attention span of 240 characters, you have almost kept them in this room for 2 hours, which is a tribute to your generosity as well as your skills. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time.